Richie Allen.
Let me introduce my first guest then. I first came across him on TPV television in London earlier this year. He's a barrister, and as I mentioned earlier on, he's written for the Journal for International Security Affairs. He's briefed the US Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and given speeches and consulted all over Western Europe and the United States. He published a book called Spy Hunter a year or 18 months ago, in which he alleged, amongst other things, that Prime Minister Edward Heath was a paedophile who had murdered young boys. Now, last week, Michael was found guilty in a court of law of calling a close colleague of former Defence Secretary Philip Hammond back in April 2012. And Michael was accused of saying that a nuclear warhead had been stashed in an East London hospital and was going to be used to attack either the Queen, the Olympic Stadium or the opening ceremony. Spoke to Michael about this the other day. He's going to be sentenced for this in February. And I'm glad that he's taken the time out to speak to us on the programme tonight. Michael, good evening. Welcome to the programme.
Well, good evening, Richie, and good evening to your viewers as well. I hasten to add I am entirely innocent of these charges, and I am very confident of being acquitted on appeal.
Well, we'll get into them. First of all, you were at an LGBT party last night in London. I hope you enjoyed it.
I was indeed. Partly as a result of this case, the Rozzers, when they raided my flat, had a small stash of adult gay pornography. It wasn't a very large stash, and I hadn't in fact, it was the stuff that I'd downloaded 3 years ago, and I was in New Zealand writing the book. And as a result of that, they prosecuted me having swapped the adult gay porn for some underage gay porn of some teenagers or young men who could have been teenagers. I needed to give evidence and came out into the open on my sexuality. So I went to my first LGBT party last night. Very, very enjoyable.
Now, you brought that up, and because I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't mention that later on. I was going to mention it later on. You brought it up now, so we'll just get rid of that. We'll deal with that now. You have a conviction on your record of containing indecent images of children.
Yes.
Right. That is not a nice conviction to have. Now, you say that you didn't have indecent images of children. You had gay pornography, and there may have been underage actors in it. Is that right?
The only pornography I had, it wasn't a very large amount of pornography. It was, by the standards of these cases, quite a small amount. It was on a memory stick, which I had purchased in New Zealand in 2011. And I was investigating, well, this is all, I have to be slightly careful what I say on air. What I say in court can be recorded, of course, and the court is a privileged occasion. This isn't. I wasn't alone when this pornography was being downloaded. I was with a very nice gay man, and we were together looking at blackmail of a senior member of the New Zealand government by the Chinese head of station in Wellington. This cabinet member was married, but in the closet, and was in fact gay, and been supplied gratis and for nothing by Chinese intelligence with young Asian rent boys. Now, New Zealand intelligence, the NZSIS, became aware that the Chinese were leaning on the New Zealand government. Indeed, the Chinese were now prevailed upon the New Zealand government to have a referendum on getting the Union Jack out of the flag of New Zealand. I was consulted. Now, these consultations are all off books. NZSIS officially could not possibly be seen to be investigating the government, let alone blackmail of a senior member of the government, let alone by the Chinese. The Chinese are, in fact, all over Wellington. It was made very clear to me by New Zealand intelligence when I was down there that the Chinese are extremely active and at the moment are virtually running Wellington. Now, I was doing battle with the Chinese station in Wellington. The Chinese knew I was in town. New Zealand intelligence knew I was in town. In fact, I paid a courtesy call on Aitken House, the headquarters of NZSIS. It's down, for those of you who know Wellington, if any listeners from New Zealand, it's down. This is not classified information. It's probably in the phone book. It's down by the Beehive. You go down past the Parliament building to the Beehive, which is the main, where the Cabinet Office, the Prime Minister's office is located, and the senior government officials work. and you duck down the hill, and there you have headquarters of NZSIS, and then the headquarters of the Government Communications Security Bureau are just behind. It was actually very funny. I was invited in to Aitken, I think it's Aitken House. 3 years since I popped in there. I was invited into, anyway, NZSIS HQ, which I think is Aitken, and I was dropping off some documents, and this caused hysteria. The Chinese were in a panic. Nobody knew quite what I was dropping off. And as I went round, I went to the front counter to drop the documents off to a named intelligence officer by arrangement. And obviously they were highly sensitive documents. And I was directed to a side door. And I go out the front, around the side. The GCSB headquarters are to the rear of Aitken House. As I go around the building, a senior GCSB officer accidentally chances to bump into me, obviously not by accident. Clearly, as soon as I've dropped the documents off, clearly wanting to know what was in these documents, but clearly wanting to know what the hell was going on and what was I passing to who. And I, obviously battered any inquiries away and said, well, I've just popped down here to say hello as a courtesy, as I'm in town. And obviously I would always pay a courtesy call on the local intelligence headquarters for the good guys.
But of course you'd be known in intelligence circles, so none of that would be any surprise to you, yeah.
Well, every intelligence agency in the world knows. I mean, the only intelligence agency in the world who doesn't know who I am, possibly the Peruvians. But since I represented General Pinochet and bailed the old boy out and got him back to Chile, he was a wonderful man, by the way, very nice. Nicest dictator I've ever met.
There's a lot of people who disagree with that. I'm not going to get into that because our time is too short.
Yeah, there are all sorts of left-wing conspiracy theories about General Pinochet torturing people. He no more tortures people than the CIA. He was a lovely man, delightful man. And I was very happy to help him. He saved British lives in the Falklands.
The CIA have admitted torturing people now, remember?
Pinochet never tortured
anyone. No, you
said
said he's no more a torturer than the CIA. Just to point out, the CIA have admitted torturing people.
No, they haven't.
Have you not been watching the news the last 24 hours? They've come out and admitted that some of their techniques were very wrong. I mean, Brennan apologised to the press corps yesterday in Langley. Did you not see that?
That's John Brennan, who's a Jesuit. Brennan needs to, frankly, find a bit more backbone. No offence intended. The CIA have never used torture. What they've used enhanced interrogation techniques.
No, it's torture, Michael. It's torture. When you simulate drowning, and listen, you're too intelligent. You've been a barrister. You're too intelligent for that nonsense. When you waterboard a guy 147 times and then use evidence that he gave you while he was being tortured to prosecute him, you, as a learned man, as a barrister, cannot sit here and tell me that's okay. And I don't want to go down this road because there's too much to get into with you without bickering over this.
I have to respectfully disagree. I'm not practicing as a barrister at the moment anyway because there's conviction. So I've got a suspension panel coming up on Tuesday. So I'm probably freer than I might normally be to comment on these matters.
Yeah.
I have to say I totally disagree with John Brennan. He should not have made the admission that he did. I've got friends of mine in the intelligence community who've been waterboarded. We do it to our own people by way of training.
Lovely, Michael. There's a big difference, though. You know, I mean, we saw that when. Anyway, look, let's leave that there because there's more important things to get into, and we've only got probably about 20 minutes. Right?
I'm by. There's no rule that says that you can't have fun when you're doing intelligence work. In this ridiculous prosecution, Mr. Alan Blake, who's the state prosecutor employed by the Crown Prosecution Service, said, "Well, intelligence work is dull and boring. Not exciting." Well, yes, it is at the level of the Southeast Counter-Terrorism Unit, no offence intended to the Rozzers. Of course, police intelligence work is dull, boring and routine, but that's because we give the dullest work to the smallest brains. No offence to the boys. At the more senior level, no offence to the boys, but at my level, intelligence work would be quite fun. The knowledge of who was being blackmailed by the Chinese and who was seeing these young Asian rent boys was confined in Wellington to the gay community. And I'm having a bit of fun. I'm not married. I'm not young, but I'm single. And we were just having a bit of fun. And somebody said, "Oh, well, let's download a bit of porn." It wasn't a bit of harmless entertainment. It was
that being said,
soft gay porn.
But that being said, they placed you on the sex offenders register. How does that sit with you? And what did the judge say in summing up that case?
Well, actually, she said it wasn't a very serious allegation. This is Judge Karen Holt at Amersham Crown Court. Her Honour said, on the record, it's not a very serious allegation. She said it when I was making the point that somebody was trying to set me up and discredit me. And she said, well, why? Because it's not a very serious allegation, which is right. It isn't a very serious allegation. The underage porn, or the so-called underage porn that the Rozzers dumped on my memory stick, in fact, was of teenage boys. On their case, that's the prosecution case is teenage boys. It's not at the most serious level. It certainly wasn't extreme pornography. And the policeman who investigated the case, a man called Sergeant Clark, told me at the outset it's the sort of case that would ordinarily lead to a caution. It's not the sort of case. It's not the sort of case which would normally result in criminal prosecution.
It's not my business at all to sit here and to try and back you in any way at all. I wouldn't be any sort of a journalist if I did that. But I've had I've had a good look at it, and yeah, I mean, all things point to your version of events being true, which is, probably the reason why I called you back. I want to just say one thing.
Well, that's right.
Because it's difficult to get a word in with you. Now, hang on. I had this on television with you in London last year. This contention of yours that the British intelligence services don't kill people is laughable. It's laughable for you to say that. How can you say that to people, a guy of your intelligence? They've been doing it for centuries. So let's not get into that now.
What I actually said was they don't kill people officially. They have people to do it for them. It was extremely odd in this trial, because my flat had been raided. They seized my intelligence connections. The Rozzers, who had no idea what they were doing, hopelessly out of their depth. They deal with junior officers at MI5, and they think they've hit the big time. Good gracious me! MI5 don't carry out assassinations. They use independent contractors. Now, some of these contractors are known to me. It's a bit difficult as a barrister, even when I was practicing.
Israeli contractors are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about hitmen.
From Israel sometimes.
This is occasionally done. The Israelis, Mossad, who are very nice people, Mossad have teams called Kaidon teams. That's
very nice people.
This is good. Lovely.
There's so much to get into with Edward Heath. Are we going to sit here bickering about Mossad and MI5 and the CIA being nice people? They're murdering bastards, Michael. That's what they do. They don't murder for you and I to keep us safe. They murder at the behest of massive corporations and the military-industrial complex, and you know that. Don't come on here and say you don't know that. That's what they do.
The Germans are murdering bastards. It's the German intelligence are the murdering bastards.
What's this obsession you have with the Germans?
It's not an obsession. It's based on accurate intelligence analysis. German intelligence was never shut down in 1945. And what the DVD is the successor to the Gestapo. Now, the Gestapo are definitely murdering bastards, and so with the SD. The SD, the Sicherheitsdienst, or intelligence service of the SS, are still in business. And so are the Abwehr, and so are the Gestapo. They've just changed their name. They got rid of the raincoats. They still used Walter PPKs, which is why Ian Fleming put them in his book. They've changed the raincoats. They've ditched the raincoats, kept the same guns, and kept largely the same modus operandi. They don't have concentration camps, but they still torture people. Poor old David Kelly was tortured by GO2 and died under torture, which is why
even if I accept your version of that is right, just say I do for a minute, they would have done so with the blessing and the cooperation of the security services in this country. Don't say they wouldn't have done.
There's certainly the blessing and cooperation of the Cabinet Office. And
Kelly was murdered by senior figures within this, not within this government, but within the government of the day, to warn others not to do what he did.
I certainly am not going to dispute that at least one senior member of the Labour government was in the loop about the murder of David Kelly.
Tony Blair knows that David Kelly was murdered, and I wouldn't be surprised if Tony Blair knew about it, and if he didn't sign off on it, he probably nodded and said, yeah, it's probably for the best, you know.
You might think that. I couldn't possibly comment.
No, I wouldn't expect you to comment. No. Now, can I steer this conversation? If you want to come back on this program in January, and we can spend hours talking, and I'm not patronising you, we can do it. But I'm going to be murdered by the people who listen to this program because they're fascinated by you, and we, like everybody else in this country, is following allegations coming out to do with the historic sex abuse inquiry. Now, I'm again not going to put words in your mouth, and I'm again not trying to defend you in any way, but it's interesting what's happened to you in light of a book you wrote where you said that Ted Heath was murdering children and throwing them overboard off his yacht. Tell us about that.
Yes, well, it's not surprising that somebody downloaded some underage gay porn onto a memory stick and swapped it for mine. Incidentally, just I can make the point, my fingerprints and DNA are not on the memory stick nor on the laptop. So I haven't handled either the laptop or the memory stick they've got, or if I have handled them, they've been decontaminated for DNA and wiped clean for fingerprints, and obviously in the context of the equipment being tampered with. I suspect the laptop probably is my original laptop that was tampered with, and the memory stick was just swapped. But we're talking about a memory stick, folks, that has not got my DNA on it or my fingerprints. And yet I'm supposed to have possessed it for 6 months.
They did. It sounds like they did a pretty haphazard job. Again, I've read every article pertaining to the case, and it sounds to me like they got amateurs to do it, because if they were going to do you properly, they would have gotten real, awful, genuine child sex videos and stuff those on your hard drive.
That's what Judge Holt was saying. Well, look, Mr. Shrimpton, if they were going to set you up, German intelligence would have downloaded some very nasty, very, very unpleasant toddler pornography, that sort of, and some of this pornography that, some genuine child pornography, I don't mean teenage models, but pornography of babies and 5-year-old toddlers being raped and so on. That is absolutely vile. It's disgusting. And yes, it should be prosecuted. And yes, it should be illegal, clearly. But the problem would be that sort of pornography is not available for free. You can't just go onto the internet to an adult website which has over 18 models, says it has over 18 models, is required by federal law to keep ID documents in order to, you can't operate in the United States showing pornography unless you've got ID documents for the people who are modeling on your website. And if you breach federal law, you're at risk of going to prison.
I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt, and I believe you. And my listeners can shoot me for saying that if they want, but I want to move on now. I want to move on. Michael, we'll never get through this. We got to move on now.
Sorry, yes, I'm wandering on a bit.
You're a lawyer. You're typical, and it was the same when I interviewed you on television. I couldn't get a word in. Now,
that's a compliment to a lawyer.
That's a compliment to a lawyer. When did you know that Ted Heath was sexually molesting and murdering children? When did it come to your attention?
Well, firstly, as a barrister or about to be ex-barrister, I don't know. I'm actually still a barrister. As a barrister, I use words with advisedly, with care. Ted Heath, I've never suggested Heath himself murdered any of the boys that he abused. And he was abusing boys down to about the age of 14. Other people on the boat, on the crew, murdered the boys and threw them overboard, their bodies weighted down by chains.
Where, Michael? Where was this taking place?
This was taking place around in the waters around the Channel Islands. The boys were picked up from the Hope de la Regaine children's home in Jersey, which itself was an old Abwehr facility. There's a strong connection between German intelligence and Hope de la Regaine. It was used by German intelligence in World War II. Heath, who was working for the Germans, is taking boys on board Morning Cloud, particularly Morning Cloud 4. There were several Morning Clouds. They were brought to him by Jimmy Savile. Savile was running a paedophile ring with the protection of the Cabinet Office, partly because the Cabinet Secretary, John Hunt, was also a paedophile. Savile and other members of the ring were supplying boys to John Hunt, the Cabinet Secretary, and to Heath and to other senior figures.
In the 1960s, Michael?
Oh, no, we're into
the 70s. We're into the 70s now.
Oh, yeah, this was going on when a friend of mine, the late Vice Admiral Sir Louis Le Bailey, was Director General of Intelligence at the Ministry of Defence. This was still going on. The missing children, and for the avoidance of doubt, we're talking about dozens of kids going missing. There's no doubt that we've got missing kids. There are no bodies. The police in Jersey thought the bodies might be buried in the grounds of the children's home. Well, they weren't. The bodies have never been discovered because they're thrown overboard. So we've got several dozen missing kids. These kids are picked up from Haute de Garenne by Savile and an accomplice. The accomplice is still alive, so I won't name him. Savile and the accomplice take the kids against their will, probably, they may have offered them.
Now, you said you won't name the accomplice. Have you told the police about this accomplice?
Oh, there's the police. No, there's absolutely no point, Mike. I'm not going to the police with any intelligence. I mean, it's above their heads, and they wouldn't be seriously. They're not going to investigate it. And even if they wanted to investigate it, they'd be stopped.
Would the accomplice be somebody who's very well known? I'm not going to try and get you to name him. Don't worry about that. And you're too clever for that anyway. Is it somebody very well known, the accomplice?
No, he isn't. His name has been made available to the police in Jersey, and it's known to MI5. But I wouldn't bother taking it to the police. The police in this country are not ever going to take child abuse seriously, not at this level. It's way above the police's payroll. There's no way any police force will be allowed to investigate Heath or Hunt.
Well, most of our listeners would actually agree with you there. Because
look at the way Savile was protected by the police. Savile was protected by the police for years. And the reason he was protected by the police is because after 1964, police chief constables reported to the Cabinet Office. We don't have independent police in this country. They report to the Cabinet Office. There's no way a police force controlled by the Cabinet Office is going to investigate a Cabinet Office paedophile ring. It's just nonsense. The police are implicated. The police have protected Savile for decades. Now, what was happening was that
quick question before you go any further. Where were the press at that stage? Don't tell. I know you're not going to tell me, but nobody's going to convince me that senior newspaper editors did not know what was going on. And I'll tell you why. They did know. I've been a journalist 16 years. We know everything.
Yes.
Because we have informants. Well, we know a lot. People tell us things.
The news of the world knew.
The news of the world knew, did they?
The Sunday Times probably knew.
And didn't give a shit, basically.
And didn't give a shit, no. But the trouble was that Heath took us into the EU. If Heath had been exposed whilst he was alive as a paedophile or someone involved in the abuse of teenage boys, strictly speaking, he wasn't a paedophile. His interest was in boys over the age of 14. If the country had known that Heath was sexually abusing, against their will, boys over the age of 14, forcibly raping them, and that these boys were then being murdered to cover up his crime. These are serious crimes.
The palace must have known about this.
Sorry?
The palace must have known about this.
Oh, not necessarily, no.
Well, I'm not believing it for a minute, Michael. Are you telling me that a guy that was getting up to what Savile was getting up to would be allowed to get anywhere near the royal family with the sort of security? They would have known, MI6 would have known what Savile was doing. How was
MI6 knew.
Well, how was he getting so close to members of the royal family then, without them knowing? I don't believe it.
Because the Cabinet Office control the palace machinery, or at least they have until very recently. The Cabinet Office always insisted on appointing the Queen's private secretary. And this an example that came up in my prosecution. I did a very confidential report for MI5. I copied it as a courtesy to the security office at the palace. And then an idiot, no offense intended, an idiot named Todd in the security liaison office checks into the Cabinet Office, and that report finds its way to the Rosses without clearing it with the Queen's private secretary or with any of the principals of Buckingham Palace. By that I mean His Royal Highness Prince Philip or Queen Elizabeth. And he acknowledged in court on oath that he hadn't checked it with the principals. He deferred to the Cabinet Office. So did the police. It was the Cabinet Office who ordered my arrest. It wasn't the Ministry of Defence. The Ministry of Defence consulted the Cabinet Office. Cabinet Office told the police to arrest me, told the police to search my flat. They wanted to find out. The Cabinet Office knew there was a nuclear warhead in London. They wanted to find out how I knew. And they were hoping to get a handle on my sources. Of course, they were disappointed because the heavy-duty sources were staying at least two hops back. So they weren't in direct contact with me. So they never really traced. In fact, they never spoke to the more important sources. They only spoke to the intermediary, who, of course, has his nose put out of joint because I refer to him as intermediary. I'm sorry. He was the intermediary.
Let's get back to Prince Philip and the Queen. If you did a cross-section, a survey of any, 100 people in any village or town in the UK tonight, and they knew the facts as we know them, I'm pretty certain somebody who's been in this business for, as I said, over 15 years, that nobody will believe that the royal family didn't know anything about Jimmy Savile. It's impossible, Michael.
I think I'm quite sure.
And if they knew, they're complicit.
Well, no, I have to be very careful about the royal family. The royal family, I'm quite
You
sure.
do, but I don't, because I believe they knew enough about it, and I believe it's no a coincidence that young men are coming out now and women and saying that while working at some of the palaces that they were sexually abused. I'm not having it for a minute. They didn't know, Michael.
Or the cabinet office running the palace machinery. Of course, that's possible. I think one has to be very careful. The royal family never liked Savile. They were always very wary of him. Savile was foisted on the palace. I don't think anybody in the palace, and I'm quite sure the Queen.
Michael, we have. Sorry to interrupt you again. We have letters sent to Jimmy Savile by Prince Charles, private letters, where Charles is basically slobbering all over him, saying that nobody will ever know how great a man you are until after you're dead. You're great, you're great, you're great. Charles couldn't get enough of him. So it's wrong when you say that the palace didn't like him. He was beloved by Prince Charles. And the Queen and the Queen and the Queen Mother thought he was the greatest thing since sliced bread.
I'm sure. No. Be slightly careful. Prince Charles may have liked him and thought he was doing good charity work. But Prince Charles, I'm sure, was taken in by the charity work. No offence intended. But you're talking many years ago when Prince Charles was much younger. The Queen Mother, I'd be very surprised. I never met the Queen, and sadly I never met the Queen Mother. She was a friend of several friends, but I never met her. I doubt very much whether either of their Majesties would have been very taken with Jimmy Savile. I think they would have been wary of him. They would have been impressed with his charitable work.
Why did he spend so much time at the palace then? Why did he have so many private audiences with them? It doesn't add up, Michael.
He was being pushed in the direction of the palace in order to embarrass the palace. It's the whole point. The Cabinet Office control.
I don't understand why you're so protective of the royal family. I don't understand that. I like you a lot, and I like having you on, and I don't understand how you can be so protective of them. I mean, they're some of the most evil people.
But I love the Queen. I love the royal family, and I am a monarchist. But I am pro-British. Remember, I am one of the good guys.
They're not even British, these people.
I'm extremely protective of the royal family, and I know that the royal family continually, the Cabinet Office and German intelligence have continually sought to embarrass the royal family. Look at the way they snuck that wretched woman, Wallis Simpson, into a relationship with King Edward. Edward VIII was set up. Wallis Simpson was reporting to the Abwehr. She was a German agent, as the FBI well knew. The FBI held out on us, as the FBI privately acknowledged to me some years ago in Washington. But coming back to the royal family...
Can I just mention this? It's been mentioned by a couple of our listeners, and I was going to get to it anyway, because obviously this is a subject most journalists are, arming themselves with as much knowledge as they possibly can.
Yes.
Louis Mountbatten brought Savile into the royal family's inner circle. And by Savile's own admission, this is for our listeners who don't know, this is the guy who was murdered by the IRA off the coast of Kerry, wasn't it? 30 odd years ago. Mountbatten was a paedophile by Savile's own admission. And again, don't tell me the royal family didn't know that Mountbatten was a paedophile.
No, but you have to be careful. Mountbatten was a German agent, as I've explained in Spy Hunter. Now, it makes complete sense to me. In fact, you've just told me something I didn't know, and it has the ring of truth about it. I have to say I'm not going to dispute that. It would make sense to me that Mountbatten would introduce Savile into the royal family. Mountbatten was working for the Germans, like his father. Remember, Mountbatten's real name is von Battenberg.
Yeah.
His father was an Austrian agent working for the Imperial German Secret Service, who was outed by naval intelligence in 1914 and forced to resign because of his links with German intelligence. Sadly, there was the Lloyd George was also working with the Germans, and it wasn't possible to prosecute him. But Mountbatten is the man who tries to blackmail the Queen over the royal assent to the European Communities Act with compromising photographs of Princess Margaret, putting Her Majesty in an extraordinarily difficult position. Some listeners may have seen that marvellous movie about the bank job, which is actually factually based.
Well, this is when Princess Margaret was seeing Johnny Bindon, I presume. We're talking about that, are we?
Yes.
In the Caribbean, yeah.
Poor old Princess Margaret. She was ratted on by the cabinet secretary of the day, who was working for the Germans in the 1950s. Her marriage to Peter Townsend, who was a splendid man, was blocked, even though the king had approved it. It was quite scandalous. The Cabinet Office, working with Lambeth Palace, blocked a marriage that had been approved by the king. It should have gone ahead. Poor old Princess Margaret was denied the love of her life. She was pushed into a marriage with Snowden, and I don't think there was much affection there, sadly. And poor old Princess Margaret, she did her private life was a little bit tangled. But who can blame her?
She liked to drink a cigarette and a good shag. Let's be honest about it. I mean, I knew guys who knew Johnny Bindon.
I like a drink.
I've interviewed guys. I'm not knocking the woman for it. I'm not knocking.
I like a drink and a good shag. I'm not going to criticize anything but like a drink and a good shag.
But these are all German people. I can't understand how you could swear allegiance to these people when they're all Germans anyway. I don't. It's a contradiction in terms. From a guy of your intelligence. Of course, they're Germans.
The German connection is by marriage. It's through Sophia, the Electress of Hanover. Sophia was the granddaughter of James I. Sophia marries into the royal house of Hanover. And remember, they're not Germans; they're Hanoverians. And your Hanoverian is actually a very nice German.
The consort is a Nazi. Michael, I mean, he is, and we know he is, a Nazi sympathiser. Come on, man. You're talking to people. This is going out all over southern and eastern Spain and Mallorca, where there are expats, mostly middle-aged people, who might not be as intelligent as you. I'm not as intelligent as you, but they know when somebody is talking bollocks, and I don't mean to insult you. So don't insult my guests. These are German people, and Prince Philip is a Nazi sympathiser.
No, he's not.
Prince Philip. Jesus Christ. I wish we were on television. I could start flashing the images up in front of you. You know damn well he is.
Prince Philip fought the fascists. Prince Philip risked his life. He was manning a searchlight platform on the battleship Valiant during the Battle of Atapan. And the searchlight, for anybody who understands naval, many of the listeners may not understand naval history, the searchlight platform was exposed. It wasn't armoured, and it was the first thing the Italians would be aiming at because it was a night battle. Valiant was the only ship in the battle in the battle line that had ranging radar, and the Valiant's role was very, very important because of her radar. I don't think Warspite had radar.
Do you know, I was looking forward to this weekend so much. You know that.
The first thing the Italians were aiming at the Battle of Matapan, the Fiume, the Pola, the Zara, they were all homing in on the Valiant searchlight platform because the Valiant was illuminating the Italian targets for the battle fleet.
Do you know what annoys me about you? What annoys me about you is that bizarrely, I think you're actually sincere. And that's what bugs me.
I'm also right.
Listen, you're not right. Listen, hang on a second now, Michael. Saxe Coburg gossip, which you mentioned, that's German anyway. So let's not even get into that. Look, let's just stop the bickering for a minute, because what's really important is, regardless of your bizarre love for a bunch of Germans who've been shitting on people for 70 years in this country and beyond that, and I can say that I'll probably get a slap on the wrist for saying it by the people who syndicate this program, and that's my personal opinion. Let's talk about what's really important.
Prince Philip, I've met Prince Philip only a couple of times. We've only met, I think we've met twice at St James's Palace. Only briefly, just hello, Your Highness, Your Royal Highness. He's a sweetie. He's an absolute
I would have been checking my pockets after I walked away from him.
He's a lovely old man.
Let's get to what's really important, because we could bicker all day long about the British intelligence not killing anybody in the royal family.
He's principled.
Let's not waste the last 6 minutes, because you did, as my colleague David Icke did in 1998 when he wrote The Biggest Secret, and he named Ted Heath and others. You've done people a great service when you wrote Spy Hunter. You did do that, and I commend you for it. Now, this is the tip of the iceberg, right? What we're hearing at the moment, a child was murdered, a magistrate thinks that their son might have been killed, and all of this. Theresa May is doing everything she can to keep a lid on it. We're going to keep hiring stooges to head up the inquiry as best we can. It's all going to come out eventually. Michael, when people like David Icke and others, not just David, but Andrea Davison, former security expert and all of that, when they say that the numbers are staggering, tens of thousands over the years, maybe more, not just in Britain and around the world, do you agree with that? And how big is this going to get in the next couple of years?
Oh, I think it's going to get huge. I mean, what I said in Spy Hunter was thought by some at the time to be outrageous and controversial. I got slagged off at the intelligence conference at Gregunnog last year by the official historian for the Joint Intelligence Committee. People were guffawing at my claims. They're now almost mainstream. The concept of children being murdered, having been abused, has now entered the public domain. I think worldwide, yes. For example, in the Madeleine McCann case, we shut down.
Now, be careful. They're the most litigious people in the world. I have no idea what you're going to say. I don't know what your opinion on the McCanns is, but if it's anything about the McCanns, just be very careful. They sue more than anybody I've ever come across in my life. Except maybe for a guy in Canada. Go on.
My opinion of the McCanns is high. As people, they're decent people. They had nothing to do with the disappearance of their daughter. They're two perfectly nice people whose daughter happened to be kidnapped by German intelligence in order to allow a senior official of the European Union to abuse it. Well,
I think you're just trying to make us laugh. You're obviously an unbelievably bright guy. I've read Spy Hunter. I think when you come out with stuff like this, I think it's almost like disinformation. Do you know that?
No.
It is, Michael.
No. This is what happened. German intelligence wasn't shut down in 1945. That's the key to understanding the post-war world. That's why the world is such a mess. Now, the McCanns were not involved in the disappearance of their daughter. There was a DVD paedophile ring, and in their context of that investigation, we came across a child snuff movie facility where they were murdering kids. After they're abused, they get murdered in snuff movies. Absolutely vile, disgusting. I mean, as bad as anything that's going on the Third Reich, and straight out of the worst horror story you could imagine, just as bad as what they were doing at Auschwitz. These poor kids, the graves, the people were weeping at NSA. They were absolutely in tears because they were seeing these pathetic, tiny graves of these kids. They were mostly Algerian and Moroccan kids. They were teenage boys, but some were younger. And you could see from the size of the graves that these were kids. And some of them were quite young because the graves are small. And these kids are being buried around this facility near Toledo. And I think from memory, there was about 50 graves on one facility only. And that was just one. Now, we got that one shut down, and we shut down a pedophile ring in Madrid. I briefed in Spanish intelligence. The CNI boys shut down one ring and made a couple of middle-ranking arrests. But it's like a seven-headed hydra. You cut one head off and another head appears. I wouldn't query a figure of tens of thousands. We know that hundreds of kids have gone missing out of one city alone, Sao Paulo. We know the Germans are bringing them across the Atlantic in their Type 21 transport U-boats, and they still have this old fleet of U-boats that they use for transport. We know the Jerrys are bringing hundreds of kids across from Sao Paulo, speaking Portuguese, of course, and they were being brought in through Portugal. And that's the Portuguese connection to Madeleine McCann. The ring was operating in southern Portugal because it was mainly concentrating on Portuguese-speaking Brazilian kids who were being kidnapped in Sao Paulo. These are street kids that nobody would miss. And they were being fed into paedophile rings operating in Amsterdam and The Hague, 2 rings in Brussels and Paris.
But they weren't feeding into paedophile rings in this country, though. And it's this country right now that so many of us are interested in, of course.
The kids in this country tended to be taken from children's homes.
Of course, yeah.
The main source of kids for abuse in this country has been Labour-run children's homes or ex-German intelligence facilities in the Channel Islands. The main source of children for abuse is social services. And the social services are largely under central control because local government in Britain is a joke, and in reality it's run from the cabinet.
I think the next couple of years, Michael, are going to be fascinating, in the extreme. Look, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. I hope that when the sentencing happens in February, I hope it goes well, and I hope that there's nothing silly happens there with respect to a custodial sentence.
I'm hoping not to end up in Wormwood Scrubs. Yes.
Well, I hope so, mate. I do, because we might disagree on a lot of things, but I think you naming Heath and others and coming out and backing up what others had done years before you, I think is important. Have a good Christmas. Look after yourself, and come back on the programme in the new year. Hopefully, you won't be going to jail.
Happy Christmas to all your listeners.
Richie Allen.